We've had a number of text messages and emails from a lot of our listeners just asking if we could ever get you on at some point, and finally we've got you here. Now, to our listeners who might not be aware of you, I know that you're a public speaker, you're a writer, but I was trying to work out, well, how would I describe David Icke? And the first thing that came to my mind was philosopher. Would you say that that was right?
Well, basically, I'm a seeker of knowledge, which then I communicate through the books and the talks. My life has just been, well, extraordinary, really. Extraordinary. It's hardly describes it. I was a professional footballer for a while, and rheumatoid arthritis, finished that at 21. Then I became a journalist on newspapers and radio, and then I eventually got into television with the BBC as a sports and news, what they call anchor. And then I got involved in green politics for a while, which was very, very important to me because I just saw politics from the inside and the total garbage and irrelevance it is. And then in 1991, extraordinary things happened to me, and it basically came from during 1989 when I was working for the BBC and also being a national spokesman for the Green Party at the time. I had this strange feeling that when I was in a room alone, I wasn't alone. There was like a presence there. And this got more and more powerful and powerful and powerful through 1989 into 1990. And one day I was near my house on the Isle of Wight in England, and I was walked into a newsagent shop, and as I stood there at the entrance, my feet were like burning. The bottom of my feet were burning, and it was like magnets were pulling them to the ground. And I'm thinking of, what do you do? What's going on? And then it wasn't a voice, but it was a very strong thought form that passed through my mind, which just said, go and look at the books on the far side. And I'm thinking, where did that come from? And I started walking in this daze towards these books, and I knew this newsagent, Mills and Boon and Perfectly Formed English Roses and, all this stuff, Barbara Cartland type stuff. It was all there, and I thought, well, what's in it for me here? But in among the Mills and Boon was this one book with a woman's face on the front. It was called Mind to Mind, and I picked it up because it was so different to the others, and I turned it over and I saw the blurb, and it said that she was a psychic and she was telling the story of her life and all the rest of it. So I'd never seen a psychic in my life before, but what immediately hit me when I read the blurb was, I wonder if this woman would pick up what this presence I'm feeling. So I went to see her and didn't tell her anything except that I've got rheumatoid arthritis and maybe your hands-on healing. She did the old energy healing, might help. But the real reason I wanted to see if she picked something up, never said a word to her about it. And then I went a couple of times, got the hands-on healing, had a nice chat. Third time I went, I'm sitting on this medical type bench, and I felt like a spider's web, like a cobweb on my face, which really kind of hit me because I'd read in her book that sometimes when other levels of reality are trying to lock into you, it sometimes feels like a spider's web on your face. Yeah. I know all these years later what that is. It's electromagnetic energy, because communication from other levels of reality outside of what we call visible light is done through electromagnetic connection. That's why you feel like, when you're in a situation where there's a lot of electromagnetism about from maybe a crowd in a sports stadium or technology, you feel like someone's stroking your face. That's exactly what it is, electromagnetic energy. Anyway, I'm sort of sat there thinking, oh my goodness, this was in her book. Never said a word to her. And about 10 or 15 seconds later, she launches her head back and said, oh my God, I'm going to have to close my eyes for this one. This is powerful. Now my backside's now slipping down this bench thinking, what's going on? Where have I got myself into? Anyway, long story short, she starts saying that this figure, it was just a projection, something to focus on, because it's consciousness that is communicating, not some physical thing. And she said, I'm being told to tell you these things. And she said, you're going to go out eventually on a world stage and be world famous, revealing great secrets, because there is a whole story that humanity needs to know. and you're going to tell it basically, and of course, and a load of other stuff on top of that, all of which has happened. And you know, I'm sitting there, I'm reading the news and introducing the sport, and being a spokesman for the Green Party, and this woman suddenly telling me I'm going to go out on a world stage and all this is going to happen. But although, you know, the reaction should have been, you must be having a laugh, something inside me said, I'm going to go with this. I'm going to go with this. It was like a sort of knowing without knowing in detail why I felt like that. Yeah. And of course, what's happened since has been incredible, because from basically the moment I left her house that day, my life has been this incredible synchronistic journey of information coming to me through personal experience, by kind of the right books turning up, right documents turning up, the right people turning up who know what goes on the inside. And for the last 21 years, I've been putting this information together. Yeah. And it's across a vast range of subjects, because I kind of understood pretty early on that if you're going to get a grasp on what's really going on in the world, you have to get some kind of understanding with so many subjects, including the nature of reality itself. Because when you look at the reality that we experience an apparently solid physical world. Well, it's not solid and physical. It can't be. I mean, scientists tell you that the physical world is made of atoms. If anyone's ever seen the inside of an atom, it has no solidity. It's just space, and this is the great kind of quantum physics question. How can something that has no solidity make up a solid world? The answer, it doesn't. And I explain in my books and my talk in New Zealand coming up that how that is. It's really, really simple. When you think then that those that are manipulating humanity, which I've been exposing all this time and continue to do so, they at the inner core of the network understand what reality is and how we're interacting with it, and they therefore structure society to get us to experience reality and have a perception of self and the world that suits the few controlling the many, i.e. you have no power, you're just little you, and you're insignificant. When you realize how reality works, we're anything but insignificant.
Now, just to talk about these people who are in control, because I watched something on YouTube, and you were saying, for instance, you've got your George Bushes and your people like that, and that they're not the people actually in control. So, do you have any idea who the people are that?
Well, the House of Rothschild is right up there. The Rockefellers in America are right up there. The royal families of Europe, actually the royal family singular, are right up there, because it was interesting that from almost within days of leaving that psychic's house, after that experience, you're going to go out and do this and that and the other, the area of the world we now call Iraq came up.
Yeah.
And of course, at one point, thousands of years BC, it was called Sumer, and then became Babylon, Assyria, under many different names. And as the years have unfolded, it's clear that certain family bloodlines from that area of the world, former Sumer Babylon, have expanded out across the world into Europe, where they became the European aristocracy. They were involved in the establishment of Rome, and they became the royal families. And because of the European empires, not least the British, but others too, these families were then exported, or expressions of them were exported all over the world. And when it's very relevant to New Zealand and Australia, of course, when we had this apparent rolling back of the colonial European empires, where countries got their independence in theory, the bloodlines under different names and the secret society networks through which they manipulate society stayed out in those countries, in Australia, in New Zealand, in North America, Canada, United States, and elsewhere. And they've gone on controlling those countries ever since, covertly, because what we saw at that point was a switch from one kind of control to a much more effective type of control. When you have something like colonial rule or fascism, communism, apartheid, it's horrible, but at least the people subjected to it, they know where they stand. Yeah. They're in a tyranny, and at least on one level they can see who the tyrants are. But when you have that situation, there will always be a time, because the public know where they are, where they will rebel against it. It might take a long time, but they eventually will. The greatest form of control is a control where people think they're free, where they're sitting in a prison cell but they can't see the bars, that they think that freedom equals having a vote every 4 or 5 years for people actually controlled by the same force, different parties, to go in and do what they like. I mean, there is no contract between politicians that say in election campaigns, we are going to do this if you vote for us, and them actually doing it. So what we have is a situation where politicians tell you what they think you want to hear to get your vote, and then they go and do as they like. We've seen the most extraordinarily extreme example of that with Obama in the United States, of course. And so people, they're told they live in a democracy, they live in a free country, but actually they don't. Their choices are being fundamentally manipulated and suppressed, not least economically. And so what they've created, and this is really important for people to understand how a few can control the many. They've created globally now the secret society and family bloodline equivalent of a transnational corporation. So if you take McDonald's, I wish someone would, it has a headquarters in America, and in each country they have the subsidiary companies of McDonald's, and their job is to introduce the corporate policy dictated by the headquarters. So when you go into a McDonald's in Moscow or Auckland or Sydney, you're going into basically the same McDonald's. And this secret society bloodline network operates in the same way. The headquarters is in old Europe. It's very, very powerful, of course, in America. But America is used by this network to fire the bullets, but the guns being loaded in Europe, not by the European governments, by the center of this web in places like the City of London, financial district, Rome, Paris, Berlin. And then in each country they have a subsidiary network of families and secret societies whose job it is to introduce the centrally dictated global agenda in their sphere of influence, i.e. their country. And so when I travel around the world, I see the same blueprint and the same things being introduced, justified by the same means. And these national networks then have their subsidiaries in the towns, cities, and communities of the country. And so from this spider's web, the center, the inner sanctum, the spider, can dictate and manipulate right down into a local community on the other side of the world, and this is how it works. And so what they've got now is this network controls overwhelmingly the global media. It controls the global banking system. It owns the transnational corporations, which in the end, if you really get deeper and deeper in the rabbit hole, is one corporation. And it owns the armament companies. And so it lends money to governments, i.e. the people have to pay it back plus interest, debt, to buy weapons from them armaments companies to then drop on countries that are being manipulated into conflict. And then they lend more money to rebuild the country and all the rest of it. And this has been going on for centuries now, and it's meant that these families have taken control, not least through massive amounts of indebtedness to governments, businesses, and the people in general. And we're seeing more and more of it now. Of course, it's just getting grotesque. And they basically own the world. And what they do is they cover it up with proxy directors and proxy front people. But when you get behind the scenes, a very, very few people own basically much of the world's resources and what we call wealth.
Would you say, because, you know, we look at what you're saying, the wars that we have with Iraq and Afghanistan, and the one about Afghanistan, I was always wondering what your take on that would be. What's going on there? What's the appeal? Why does everybody want to have a bite at Afghanistan down the years? I mean, is it? I've heard it said that it's a firing range to justify spending on arms to keep economies ticking over. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, in the current context, as I've been saying since about 1995 in my books, we're being manipulated towards a third world war. And in fact, the Third World War is already happening. It's just not been officially declared. It started on September the 11th, 2001. It's so far involved Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and will no doubt soon involve Syria. And you know, I've put in my books over the years, you know, the content of letters and documents from way back, where they were planning to have 3 world wars in a stepping stone process. After each war, they'd have more control, and the Third World War was designed to be the one that gave them total control. Because what they want is, this is what they've been leading towards, they want a world government dictating to every country, a world central bank controlling all global finance, a world army to impose the will of the world government, a world currency, which is designed eventually just to be a single electronic currency, no cash. And there are fundamental implications for freedom, because if you go into a shop now and you hand over a credit card, cashless money, and the computer says no, won't accept it, well, you can still pay cash. But when there's no cash, the computer's deciding if, what, and how, and whether you purchase. That's the idea. And they also want a microchip population, with every child microchipped at birth. And people laughed when I said that. They're not laughing so much now, because we're moving towards microchipping all the time. And what you need to bring that about is techniques, and there are 2 particular ones that mass mind manipulate the population to, if not agree to have that, to see it as the only means of solving problems. And these 2 techniques I call problem reaction solution and the totalitarian tiptoe. Problem reaction solution is devastating. It's played on us all the time at all these different levels of this web, you know, globally, nationally, locally. What you do is you want to change society in a way that you know that if you do it openly, you're going to get a resistance from the population. For instance, you want to invade Afghanistan, you want to invade Iraq, you want to have more and more surveillance and control and of the populations and the fine detail of their lives. Well, if you just stood up and said we're going to do this, you get massive resistance. So you don't. You play problem, reaction, solution. Stage 1, you create a problem. It could be a terrorist attack. It could be a banking collapse. It could be a government collapse. It could be a war. You then tell the people through an unquestioning media, mainstream media, the version of the problem that you want them to believe, i.e. Bin Laden orchestrated 9/11 from a cave in Afghanistan, and the banking collapse happened because of so and so and so and so. And what you're looking for at stage 2 is a reaction from the public, a reaction that says something must be done. What are they going to do about it? And then at stage 3, you offer the solution openly in changes in legislation and society that say we must do this to solve the problem. But of course the problem was covertly created, and these solutions, as we've seen since 9/11, increasingly more extreme, have been advancing an agenda of human control, an Orwellian state, which would never have been accepted by people without the initial problem. And so we have a situation where if you go and look into the alternative media, I wrote a book about this in September. It came out in September 2002. It was called the World Trade Center, Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster, why the official story of 9/11 is a monumental lie. I mean, it's a fairy tale. It really is, and there's an incredible amount of information now on the web. If people go to my website, davidicke.com, and just look into the 9/11 archive, they'll see videos and articles and documents to show that the official story of 9/11 is a monumental lie, and everything has come from that. Tony Blair has said virtually nothing, I'm sure, in most of his life, if he was like this in younger days, but certainly in his political career, that was actually not true. That was actually true. I mean, if you find a half-truth in a Blair speech, it's a typing error. But what he did say, which was true, was the world changed on 9/11, and yes, it did. And why? Because that's why 9/11 happened. And this problem, reaction, solution, you see playing out all the time. And there's another version, which I call no problem, reaction, solution. And that's not a real problem. It's an invented one. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, human-caused climate change. I mean, these are all no-problem reaction solutions to justify changes in society, or in the Iraq case, pepper bombing civilians in Baghdad, justified by an invented problem. And then alongside problem, reaction, solution comes the totalitarian tiptoe, as I call it, and that's real simple. That's, you're at A, and you know you want the world to go to Z. But if you go from A to Z, or even nearly that in one leap, the change is so blatant that people look up from the game shows and say, what the heck's going on? So you go from A to C to E. You go as quickly as you can, but not so quick that you alert too many people to what's going on. And every time you make another step, you promote it, explain it as totally unconnected to all the other steps, when they're absolutely connected, because they're taking the world in a certain direction. And for instance, the European Union, after the Second World War, if they had offered the European Union today, then there would have been a massive outcry. People would have said, we've just fought for 5 years to stop a central dictatorship in Europe, and you're saying that we must just do it and hand it over? You must be joking. So what do? Stage one. Just a free trade area, it's a common market, be good for jobs. Okay? And then, it would be much more effective and efficient if we had more and more centralization of organizations in Europe, because it will make, and on it goes, stepping stone. And I quote in my books a letter written by a man called Jean Monnet, who's known as the father of Europe. And he wrote this letter the day after I was born, on April the 30th, 1952, in which he said, the idea is that we just keep centralizing power and keep justifying it by economic means, and eventually we'll have a United States of Europe by stealth, and before the people know it's happened, it will have happened and be irreversible. That's what's gone on, and that's what they want to do in this area of the world with APEC and ASEAN and all these things, where they're now talking about needing a free trade area in this area of the world. And of course they've got one in America with NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And what they want is, this is where the stepping stone's going in relation to this, they want the world government, global dictatorship, then they want the second level of the government tyranny, the world tyranny, to be the European Union, the American Union, the Pacific Union for this area of the world, the African Union, which they already have, a Middle East Union, and they would be the next level of government. And in Europe, we can speak here now from long and bitter experience. We've now reached a point in Europe with the passing of the outrageous Lisbon Treaty a few years ago now, in which the not elected people, because the European Parliament's irrelevant. They only have a European Parliament so they can say it's a democracy. It's not a democracy. What's a democracy? At its best, it's tyranny by the majority, and most of the time, it's not even by the majority anymore. But no, it's a dictatorship by dark suits who are appointed, called the European Commission, and they dictate to countries to the point now where 70 to 80% of laws that become law in Britain do not start out in the British Parliament. They start out in the European Commission, and they want it eventually to be 100%, because the next stage is to start breaking up countries into regions, and the European Union have produced maps for it, of breaking up places like Britain and France into regions, and then locking different regions together in small groups that are not even within the same country. So this European Union map for the regions of Europe has regions of southern England connected to regions of France, connected to regions of Scandinavia, for goodness sake.
What's the criteria on that, do you know?
Well, their criteria is that they want to de-unify any unified response to the edifice of power of world government and these unions around the world. So they want to then divide and rule by breaking the next layer down into regions that are from different countries. So even there's not even that national bonding to bring people together in unified opposition to what's being dictated from above. The agenda that is unfolding ever more quickly now, because there's a very simple equation, the more you centralize power, the more power you have centrally to centralize even quicker. And this is why this process of centralization of global power is getting faster and faster and faster. And it's a long time since that what has happened has been so obvious, although not why it's happening and who's actually behind it, but what is happening, that it's been given a name called globalization. What is globalization? It's the centralization of global power in every area of our lives, where corporations are dictating to entire nations all over the world. That's the idea. Mussolini described fascism as basically the combination of corporations and the state. And that's what we've got now, corporations and the state working as one unit, which is why we've had this staggering transfer of wealth and transfer of debt the other way between people and the banks. I mean, I know people can look at it and say, oh, the bailouts of the banks were outrageous. Yes, they were. But look at it deeper, what's happened here. We've just seen a coup on the global economy, in the sense that these banks, and I explain in the talk in New Zealand how it came about, because it wasn't an accident, it was coldly created and engineered, where the banks end up with vast amounts of what they call toxic debt. And then the governments, i.e. the people, bail out the banks, and the countries take on the toxic debt. Now private debt has become national debt. Excuse me, did I miss something here? Then the next thing comes in, and this is what we're seeing in Europe, and we're going to see in America, and we'll see everywhere eventually, and that's the point where governments, because they bailed out the banks, are now getting into financial trouble themselves, and the banks, represented by people like the European Central Bank and the IMF, are coming into the countries and saying, oh, no, we're gonna lend you more money, more debt, but to do that, you've got to sell your state assets to these corporations. This is what's happening in Europe, and you've got to have austerity programs on the population. So, let's go through this. The banks' outrageous behavior, greed to a grotesque extreme, create this massive banking crisis. It's the banks' crisis. Governments then bail out the banks and take on the debt. Debt then gets the governments and the country's economies into desperate trouble, and then representatives of the banks come in and basically take the country over and say that the people who bailed out the banks in the first place and indebted future generations for goodness knows what must have an austerity program. And the bankers' bonuses go on getting paid out in these vast, ludicrous, outrageous figures. There's been a coup on the people of the world, on the economy of the world, on people's choice, on people's livelihoods, and it's all been orchestrated because it's happening all over the world.
So would you say that these, like an individual banker, let's say, working for some multinational bank, would you say that they're your kind of agents of this program?
Well, I'll tell you how it works. If you look at any organization, doesn't matter what it is, virtually, it will be structured as a pyramid, a compartmentalized pyramid. You've got people working in banks, working in corporations, working in governments, and the vast majority of them are in the fat part of the pyramid, the bottom part of the pyramid, holding the tiny top up. And at the peak of any organization, in the capstone of the pyramid, you've got the very few people in the bank or in the government or whatever who know what the agenda is and where it's going. And then you come down from that capstone and you're meeting more and more and more people in any organization, but every time you take a step down, those more and more know less and less about what the organization is about. They only know what their contribution is, and they don't know how their contribution connects into all the other contributions of people they don't even know exist within the organization, that if you could see how they fit together, creates a very sinister picture. So when there's a banking crisis, and this is what's kind of happening now, vast numbers of bank workers lose their jobs. They're not in on it. They're just going into work to earn a living for their family and themselves. It's the few at the top who are orchestrating it, and this is important. These families, they own the banking system. They own the system. And so it doesn't matter if certain banks go bust or whatever, because they own the system. If you own the European Football Championship, it doesn't matter to you if Manchester United beat Real Madrid or Real Madrid beat Manchester United, because you own the game. And so when Bear Stearns or Lehman Brothers goes down, that's all right. That business will be absorbed by other banks in the system, which they own, because this pyramid structure means that basically the structure is like Russian dolls. Like you go into a bank. And you hand your check over or something. Now, the person you hand it to at the counter, they won't know what's happening in the bank manager's office behind them and what's being decided. He or she won't know what's happening at the next level, the next level, the next level. They just know enough to do their job. It's what they call the need-to-know system. And so the bank itself on the high street is a pyramid. With the bank manager at the top, and that pyramid goes into the next pyramid, like Russian dolls, and the next pyramid, and eventually you have a pyramid that encompasses the whole of the global banking system. And at the top are a handful of families. Transnational corporations, as quote individual organizations, they are pyramids, and they go into the next pyramid, until you have a pyramid that encompasses all the transnational corporations. And at the top of that are the same families that are at the top of the banking pyramid. It's the same with the pharmaceutical cartel, the oil cartel, the biotech cartel, the global media. And through this system, this handful of families sitting at the top of all these pyramids are dictating down through them the same basic policy, which is centralization of power in every area of our lives. And this is where the coordination of globalization comes from.
Do you see a point where we can educate ourselves enough to, or at least people can educate themselves enough to overcome this, to turn it back on itself, to stop it?
Well, it's a simple mathematical equation, really. The number of people in the world being manipulated is in the region of 7 billion. The number of people doing the manipulation in absolutely full knowledge of what they're doing is, compared with that, an absolute handful. And therefore, I see a way out of this. And what they've had to do to maintain this power of hardly even the tail wagging the dog, because so few are in full knowledge, in full awareness, involved in this compared with the target population, is they've had to divide and rule the target population. So they've divided and ruled through religion, through politics, through culture, through race, this ludicrous irrelevance we think is important, or some people do, and by dividing and ruling through war, dividing and ruling through income bracket and perceived class, and by constantly creating problems in the world that focus people on survival and focusing on a tiny little dot instead of lifting their head and seeing actually the bigger vista of what's going on, because you have to do that, because there's a lot of people investigating the manipulation of the banking system, manipulation of so-called climate change caused by human activity, absolute baloney, scientific baloney, and by additives in food and additives in drink and all this stuff. But all these things are individual dots, and you have to connect those dots and see how they all fit and all are part of a vast tapestry of human control and suppression. And then you can see actually that the people who are behind the banking scams, manipulated wars, manipulated terrorist events, poison additives in food, the dumbing down of education, more and more medication for kids, mind manipulating medication for kids, all these things, control of the global media, they all connect, and they all connect into this same network of families with the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the royal families of Europe, and agents like George Soros, Brzezinski, and Blair, the Blairs of this world, and the Obamas. They're all frontmen for this operation, and some are willing, and some don't understand what they're part of. But there's a certain range of politician that gets to the top. One who knows absolutely what he's there to do and thoroughly understands it and supports it. The very, very few. Another one is someone who just wants power for power's sake and knows that he has to do the right things, say the right things for the people that can put him there if he or she wants to get that position of power. Then there's the politicians who have massive things to hide, and they could be destroyed overnight if those things were made public. So you do what we tell you, and they won't be made public, and that's another kind of politician. And another one is the idiot, just the guy who's not very bright and is very easily manipulated and told what to do by people around him, and who in the dark suits of civil service and advisors. And most politicians, the vast majority of politicians that get anywhere near the top, are that kind of are come into one of those categories, because they do not want genuine, honest, decent, aware people in those positions of power, because it means that they won't control them, and that's not what they want.
You've talked in the past as well about earthquakes and tsunamis and them sort of plaguing the world. Now that we've had sort of a couple of high-profile and massive events like this, we've obviously had the earthquakes in Christchurch. Are these? Do you think that they're linked in some way, or can these not just be put down to natural events that occur anyway? Have been kind of occurring for years.
Yes, this is the thing. People say, "Do you believe in the conspiracy theory of history or the cock-up theory of history?" As if they're exclusive, as if you've got to choose between them. Of course, both are true. It's picking out which is the trick, and it's the same with geological events like earthquakes and also extremes of weather. On one level, of course, these events occur naturally. And they have as long as we know, and in some periods they've occurred with absolutely fantastic extremes and have actually brought an end to civilizations, etc. But they're also, we must understand, a situation where the technology now exists to do this, and to understand the world, or at least understand the possibilities with regard to non-natural events, is to understand a technology in Alaska with increasingly other connecting technology around the world known as HAARP. What HAARP does, it bounces radio waves off the ionosphere, and the ionosphere is in the upper atmosphere, and bounces them back off the ionosphere back to Earth. And what it does is create a vibration in the ionosphere, which starts a vibrating beam of very, very powerful energy. to hit a certain part of the Earth. And if you can, because everything has a vibration, everything has a frequency, and earthquakes have a frequency. And if you can bombard a point on the Earth with that frequency, you're going to make, especially if it's in an area that's geologically unstable anyway and open to it, you can create earthquakes and tsunamis and stuff like that. And we have to remain open to this. I mean, there was a guy, the scientific genius of the 20th century, a guy called Nikola Tesla, a Croatian who operated out of America. Tesla died in I think it was about the 30s, 40s, the 40s, a penniless man in a New York hotel room, and yet he was the man that invented AC current, on which the world's electricity was transformed. He was the man who invented radio technology, and not Marconi. In fact, very few people know this, that Marconi's the man who gets all the credit for it. Marconi was taken to the Supreme Court of America by Tesla, and the court found that Marconi had stolen Tesla's patents. What happened is Marconi asked Tesla if he could come and work for him because he thought he was such a genius. And what Marconi did was spend his time just copying all the patents, copying all the technical data, and then he went away and claimed it for himself. And what Tesla was doing, and there's many stories you see in old copies of the New York Times and stuff like that. He was creating lightning storms above his house using this technology, and people, of course, were complaining, calling the police. this man's starting, thunderstorms and lightning, fierce lightning storms, and he also created technology which made the Earth tremble. And there was one point, it was like something from a comedy story, really, where he turned this technology on to test it, and the whole area started to shake, and he couldn't turn it off. And thousands of windows were broken in the area around him because of this earth movement coming from his technology. Now, we're talking the early part of the 20th century. What they can do now is phenomenal. I mean, why would treaties be signed decades ago laying out the do's and don'ts of what countries can do in terms of weather manipulation if the technology didn't exist then to do it, and it does now? And when you see some of these extremes of weather, you can only describe some of it as weather wars. I mean, suddenly they started targeting Pakistan, and Pakistan then had the worst rains, and thousands and thousands of people died as a result of these enormous floods. Creating tornadoes is a piece of cake. Because what is a tornado? It's a very fast rotating electrical field. You can do that with HAARP and many other things too. The other thing that HAARP can do, which shows where this is going in terms of the economics of these people, is, and this is all in the patents, by the way. This is not me kind of making it up or saying this is what I think they do. This is in the patents. Yeah. It can X-ray the Earth, and by the way, when it's doing it, everyone's having an X-ray in the area it's doing it, and find out where the resources are. So what happens is these major corporations that are involved, connected into the military and connected into the governments that control HAARP, the corporations are then tipped off where the resources are, and they go and either manipulate an invasion of that country or go in and economically take over that country, and they get access to the resources. Anyone else who's genuinely going about their business, who doesn't have access to the HAARP data and the HAARP X-raying, can't even begin to compete, because they've got to go through much less accurate means to try to find where the resources are, to go for oil or whatever resource it is. The game's totally bloody rigged, and HAARP is a key in all these areas now. And it's interesting to me when I look at Fukushima in Japan. Because I've been ticking off for many, many years the increasing sources of radiation that humans are being subjected to. And what's happened at Fukushima is beyond description in terms of the radiation that it is continuing still to pour out into the Earth's energy field, which we interact with all the time. And it was interesting to me that I show this when I do the talks. When you look at the smoke cloud following one of the explosions in the reactors that was seen on film, and then you look at the smoke cloud caused by a small nuclear device, they are identical. And then I came to the conclusion, I wrote some articles about it a few months ago, that actually Fukushima was blown up by a small nuclear device known as a gun-type nuclear weapon. And interestingly, an Israeli company that is based in Israel at a place called Dimona, and that just happens to be the location of Israel's massive nuclear weapons program. They put a so-called security system into Fukushima. And this included these extraordinary cameras that were like 1,000 pounds in weight, and they were put in various places and in the reactors. And when you put one of these cameras next to a gun-type nuclear device, it's extraordinary. They're virtually mirrors of each other. And after the explosion happened there was a nuclear expert in America, a physics nuclear expert, who made a presentation. I think it was in Boston. It was on YouTube. The speech, and he said, "Look, this is very, very serious what we found out, because this has implications for all nuclear power stations." Actually, it doesn't, but what he said made absolute sense in another way. He said, I've always assumed that the interaction of substances, gases, hydrogen, everything, that causes an explosion at a nuclear power station can only reach a certain explosive potential. We have realized that the explosions at Fukushima were, and his word, had past detonation speed. He said that shouldn't happen. It should be impossible to get detonation speed explosions from how a nuclear explosion comes about. He said we've all put our heads together and none of us can work out how that happened. And if it can happen there, he said, it could happen anywhere. Well, maybe there's another explanation for it, that actually the detonation speed wasn't from a natural nuclear explosion at all, but from a real nuclear explosion that does go beyond detonation speed. And then you think, well, if that was the case, were those devices put into those reactors, and then the people who did it sat around sort of strumming their fingers thinking, well, all we need now is a tsunami and an earthquake? I mean, of course not. And then you look at HAARP and the potential there, if you focus that incredible power from the ionosphere radio wave combination on a certain point in the sea, you're going to cause a movement of the Earth, and the thing that's it's very difficult to get across, but it's so important, is what we see in the public arena in terms of technological potential is not even close to what is technologically possible in the shadows, which you never see. And because of this, when you're saying that this happened because they did this, so many people, and I understand it, they say that's impossible. Yes, it is, with technology that we see in the public arena, but it's not impossible with stuff they keep from us in the underground bases, which are legion all over the world. Not least places like Pine Gap in Australia and so many others across America.
Where do you think that this technology is coming from? I mean, is it coming from our top scientists, or what's the deal?
Well, in these underground bases, which go deep into the earth, and they are compartmentalized, of course. in the sense that each floor you go down has a higher security clearance than the one above. And I've talked to people who've worked in these bases, and they weigh people in and out. That's the level of security. Yeah. And if you weigh more going out than you did coming in, then they want to know what's in your pockets or whatever. And they go deep into the earth. And in the deep levels of these bases, where, again, through compartmentalization, lots of people working in the higher levels of the bases or on the surface, they won't have a clue what's going on down below. Only the few do that. And another thing they do is that they get technology where they need to do it on the surface. They get technology to part of it is made by a company in country A, another part is made by a company in country B, and so on it goes. And none of those people making those constituent parts know what it's a constituent part of. Only the people who eventually put it together know what's being what the outcome is. It's really, really compartmentalized, and it means that there is technology available to these people that we don't even know about. And in 1997, just to give you an idea of how this works and how the fierce secrecy is, I was asked to meet a CIA scientist in the United States because he wanted to get out through me what he couldn't get out himself for what became obvious reasons. And he told the story of what happened to him, in the sense that he thought he was serving his country by giving his the genius in his kind of specialization of science to his country. But very soon after he joined the CIA, he realized that this agenda that I'm exposing actually was true, and he started to rebel against it and say, I'm not doing it anymore. I don't want any part of this. And what really did it for him in the end, a story he told me, was that during the Ethiopian famine, he had developed a electromagnetic technology which could make crops grow in deserts without water. Everything has an electromagnetic field, and this technology so stimulated the electromagnetic field of plants that he said at the optimum it was like watching a time-lapse photograph, so fast did they grow. Yeah. And so he thought he was being part of an experiment to take a plane over Ethiopia and bathe the land with this electromagnetic field. But of course, it's very dangerous. You have to make sure there's no one around. And he said he was in the back of this plane working the technology, and then he was given the cue from the front of the plane, we're over this target area, and he pressed the button or whatever he did, and this massively powerful electromagnetic field went out over the land. He walked forward to the cockpit and looked out, and all he could see was thousands of dead people. Because the CIA had realized that, yes, it could do what he said it did, but they weren't bothered about feeding hungry people. They could see the weapon potential for this, where you could kill lots of people without damaging property, and which you want to take over. And what had happened, he found out, is that the word had been put out that there was going to be a food drop in the particular point, and thousands of starving Ethiopians made their way to that point and then overcame the plane and killed a lot of them in an experiment to see what would happen. At that point, he absolutely refused to work for them again and walked away. Then he said he remembers leaving home one day, and he remembers nothing else until he woke up on a medical-type bench in a room, and he felt something stuck to his chest. And as he was telling me this story, he was opening his shirt and showing me, and on his chest was this see-through, it looked like a shampoo sachet, and there was this orangey, golden-type liquid inside. And these, in the CIA, are called patches. And what happens is that in the missing time period, his body was manipulated to need the drug in this patch to survive. And if he doesn't get the drug, then he starts to die a very slow and agonizing death. And he knows that's true because he tried it out. And he has to have this patch replaced every 72 hours. And if it's not replaced, then he starts to die. And it's not replaced if he doesn't do what he tells him, what he's told to do and what he's told to develop. And he said there are thousands and thousands of scientists in America alone who are working in these underground bases totally against their will with these patches. And he said what they do in the end, he said what I'm doing is I'm keeping from them, I'm letting them know I know things that I haven't told them yet about technological possibility. He said because I know that when they think they've got everything from me that they can, they just won't replace the patch, so that the information about all this just dies with the scientist. This is what's going on while people are watching game shows and all the rest of it, and being diverted to look in one direction so they don't see what's happening behind them.
Well, I'm probably going to have to wrap it up here, David,
okay,
because I've got someone wanting to use the room in a moment. But
right,
it's been great talking to you and listening to what you've got to say, and I'm really looking forward to the speech. Now, just before you go, just tell our listeners, I mean, it's the Telstra Clear Pacific Event Centre, I think it's on the 6th of November.
Yeah.
How can people get tickets for this?
Well, if they go to my website, davidicke.com, they'll see a link there, or they can go to, what's it called? I think it's called the Lion Sleeps No More tour, which is a website based in Australia where the organisers are organising the whole thing. And I talked for about 8-9 hours in 4 sections with about 1,400 images, illustrations, taking in an A to B to C to D step of adding more and more and more and more and more information until the tapestry can be seen. And suddenly endless things that don't seem on the surface to connect can be seen to thoroughly, fundamentally connect. And suddenly this weird, bewildering world makes total sense in terms of what's happening now and also what's happened in the past.